There is an old saying about planting the wind and harvesting a storm. But on January 25, 2026, the leaders in Tehran pushed that proverb to a catastrophic extreme. They did not just ask for a storm. They sent out formal invitations for a nuclear-powered hurricane born from the absolute deepest parts of the ocean. Let me paint a picture for you. Right in the middle of Tehran on Belizer Street, as the morning mist clung to the pavement at 7 in the morning, a massive propaganda poster spanning 30 meters across went up for the whole world to see. It painted a grim fantasy of American power brought to its knees, showing a burning USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier broken in half, surrounded by black smoke and floating bodies. It was a massive, public middle finger aimed directly at Washington. Stamped right across the image in both English and Farsi were those fateful words warning about sowing the wind. Supreme Leader Khamenei signed off on this street art himself, while Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Commander Hossein Salami desperately wanted to convince the globe that the United States military was nothing more than a fragile paper tiger. News outlets like CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera splashed the image across their broadcasts within hours. Tehran was practically drunk on its own bravado, completely convinced that a scary painting would terrify the Pentagon into pulling their strike groups out of the Persian Gulf. But those artists and generals missed one crucial, fatal detail. You cannot sink an aircraft carrier with a few buckets of paint, and empires do not collapse because of cheap street propaganda. While the officials in Tehran were busy celebrating a victory they had not actually won, the real USS Abraham Lincoln was casually floating 450 kilometers to the south in the Arabian Sea. Flanked by her highly advanced Aegis escorts, the soul of the ocean was not carrying canvas and ink. She was packing 336 precision-guided tools of absolute devastation, locked, loaded, and entirely capable of turning every single radar installation and bunker in Iran into a smoking memory in under 30 minutes. Back in Washington, there was no panic. Inside the stone walls of the Pentagon, the mood was thick with ice-cold resolve. Encrypted messages quietly bounced over to the Indo-Pacific Command. Sitting in the Situation Room, the president stared at the satellite feed of the Tehran Billboard and offered one chillingly simple command. He told them that if Tehran wanted to make that scenario real, it was time to show them what brutal reality actually meant. Out on the water, Admiral Richardson read the orders on the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln. He did not laugh, and he did not shout. He simply bumped the fleet up to Condition 2 heightened alert. Standing behind him were 90 lethal combat jets and 5,500 sailors preparing to show Tehran a nightmare they had never even bothered to dream up. Strike Group 3, which included the heavy cruiser USS Gettysburg along with the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers USS John Finn and USS Paul Hamilton, began spooling their Aegis defense networks to maximum power. The sleeping lion was awake, and it was not going to waste its breath roaring. It was going straight for the throat. Back at headquarters, Commander Hossein Salami stared at his own satellite images of the strike group crawling slowly through the sea. In his deeply flawed mind, the lack of immediate American retaliation meant Washington was terrified. He turned to his subordinates and ordered them to turn their painted fantasy into reality, insisting that the Gulf had no room for outsiders. Operation Whirlwind was officially greenlit. It was a strategy rooted in the completely delusional idea that throwing enough weapons at a superpower could somehow puncture its shield. Iran dragged out everything they had available, mobilizing 38 land-based anti-ship cruise missiles, 12 aging but lethal Su-24 Fencer jets, and a wolf pack of 8 attack helicopters hiding out near Abu Musa Island. To Tehran, this was an army of gods delivering justice. To the radar crews sitting comfortably aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, those incoming threats were nothing more than tiny red dots asking for permission to be erased. Let us be absolutely clear about what happens when you try to pick a fight with the King of the Sea. The USS Abraham Lincoln does not travel by itself. It operates inside a floating ecosystem of guaranteed destruction. You have the USS Gettysburg, a floating fortress equipped to track hundreds of threats from hundreds of miles away simultaneously. Then you have the USS John Finn and the USS Paul Hamilton standing by like steel sentinels, loaded with vertical launch cells stuffed full of SM-6 and SM-2 interceptor missiles. And do not overlook the USS Mesa Island, an amphibious assault ship carrying true nightmares, elite Marines, and a swarm of AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters. Iranian military advisors had actually warned against this exact strike, calling it pure suicide. But their leaders were so completely blinded by their own fake aura of invincibility that they thought the Americans would run away at the first sight of blood. They completely misunderstood American military doctrine. If you spill the blood of a single sailor, it is repaid with the ashes of your entire empire. By 3 in the afternoon on January 25th, the skies over the water grew thick with lethal tension. At hidden bases along the coast, reckless Iranian commanders pushed the final buttons. Thousands of miles up in orbit, United States Space Force satellites instantly caught the massive thermal plumes. This was not a drill. 7 cruise missile batteries roared to life while 12 fencer jets screamed down the runways at Bandar Abbas loaded with Kh-31 missiles. The encrypted radio channels buzzed with orders to make the Billboard reel and sink the carrier to the abyss. They honestly thought their little swarm of 38 cruise missiles, coordinated with 24 air-launched weapons and 8 helicopters, would create an unsolvable matrix of death. They were terribly wrong. You simply cannot surprise a god with all-seeing eyes. On the USS Gettysburg, the massive Spy-1 radar system was already dicing up the airspace at the speed of light. At exactly 3:47 and 6 seconds in the afternoon, an electronic scream ripped through the combat center. Vampire, vampire, vampire. It was the brevity code for incoming bloodsuckers. 38 surface launches, 12 fast movers, and 8 low flyers were all converging on the strike group. Admiral Richardson stood terrifyingly calm in the middle of the hub and simply ordered all ships to general quarters with weapons free. Instantly, the destroyers opened their Mk-41 launch cells, and 8 Fa-18 Super Hornets that were already patrolling the sky locked their advanced radars onto the clumsy Iranian jets like hawks spotting chickens. At 3:47 and 20 seconds, the moment Tehran had been dreaming of finally arrived, but it looked absolutely nothing like their painting. Instead of an explosion on the deck of the carrier, the world witnessed a breathtaking symphony of white-hot death. The USS Gettysburg fired its SM-6 interceptors, tearing through the salty air at several times the speed of light to sweep down the Iranian toys while they were still dozens of miles away. Imagine the sheer horror of being an Iranian pilot watching your massive swarm of 62 weapons evaporate. The Aegis system was crunching billions of mathematical equations every single second. The USS John Finn and USS Paul Hamilton unleashed a continuous, staggering wave of 40 SM-2 missiles. The sky filled with interlacing white smoke trails and massive orange fireballs as tens of millions of dollars of Iranian military technology turned into useless clouds of metallic dust. But the true drama unfolded in the final 5 seconds. 6 incredibly lucky Iranian missiles managed to dodge the long-range umbrella and surge to within 4, then 3 kilometers of the fleet. With barely 20 seconds until impact, the point defense systems woke up. The Phalanx Gatling guns started screaming at 4,500 rounds per minute, erecting a literal wall of solid tungsten in midair. The remaining Iranian missiles were completely shredded into chaff before they could even touch the paint on the USS Gettysburg. The final tally was humiliating. 62 missiles launched, and 62 objects utterly annihilated. There was not a single scratch on an American hull, and not a single drop of blood was spilled. In the command centers of Tehran, a deathly silence took hold as their radar signatures flickered out one by one. Their massive street poster was still standing, but the leaders finally understood they had just thrown pebbles at a mountain of diamond. While the missiles were dying near the water, an even more brutal tragedy was happening 30,000 feet up. The 12 Iranian Su-24 fencers were struggling just to hold formation. Those pilots probably thought pure courage could make up for ancient technology. But here is the reality of modern air combat. If you can see your enemy, you are already too late, and if your radar is screaming, you are already a ghost. The 8 American Super Hornets did not even need to show off. From 60 kilometers away, they locked on with their active electronically scanned array radars and fired 16 fire, and forget AIM 120 AMRAAM missiles. For the Iranian pilots, it was fire and farewell. 4 of the fencers disintegrated instantly, failing to deploy a single countermeasure. The rest were transformed into terrified flying coffins, fleeing from the sheer force of American innovation. Down near the waves, an incredibly ironic duel was playing out between the Iranian AH-1JC Cobras and the American AH-1Z Vipers. The 8 Iranian helicopters hugged the water, hoping the terrain would hide them. They had absolutely no clue that 6 American Vipers from the USS Mesa Island had been tracking them for miles using next-generation thermal sensors. In exactly 180 seconds, the Persian Gulf turned into a slaughterhouse. American pilots used Sidewinder missiles and 20mm cannons to sweep the sky completely clean. All 8 Iranian helicopters were blown to pieces and dropped into the sea like heavy stones. They did not manage to fire a single shot, and not one pilot survived. What was supposed to be a historic total strike became a casual target practice session for United States forces. The surviving fencer jets ran for the mainland, learning the bitter lesson that national pride cannot outrun a heat-seeking missile. By 3:47 and 30 seconds, before the debris even settled in the water, Admiral Richardson signed the death warrant for the entire Iranian coastal military network. Operation Billboard's revenge was officially underway. The Americans were not just going to hit back. They were going to make sure Iran could never cast its gaze upon the sea ever again. The skies above the USS Abraham Lincoln shuddered as 20 Super Hornets and 10 F-35C Lightning IIs clawed into the air, loaded with an absolute treasury of destruction. We are talking about glide bombs, Stormbreaker smart bombs, and anti-radiation missiles. Leading the charge were 4 EA-18G Growler jets that began screaming across the frequency spectrum. In an instant, the entire Iranian radar network went pitch black. Tehran lost its eyes right as the real hurricane made landfall. The sheer numbers are staggering. 40 radar stations and surface-to-air missile systems were erased from existence in the first 90 seconds. American missiles chased the radar signals straight down to the dishes with absolute, terrifying precision. Next up were the missile batteries that had dared to fire upon the fleet. 7 launch sites across Bandar Abbas, Kish Island, Hormuz, and Jazz were shrouded in massive mushroom clouds. The smart bombs punched right through underground bunkers, tearing apart mobile launchers like cheap tin cans and evaporating 463 Iranian military personnel along with their hubris. At 3:54, 20 Super Hornets rained 60 bombs directly onto the Bandar Abbas airbase. Runways were transformed into lunar craters, hangars collapsed to crush the remaining fencer jets on the ground, and the control tower lit up like a towering torch. Simultaneously, 3 American escort ships unleashed a devastating salvo of 72 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Their targets were every single Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Naval Command Center in Bandar Abbas and Kish. The buildings collapsed entirely, burying the very men who had just been triumphantly broadcasting the fake demise of the carrier. But the absolute peak of the drama happened when the stealthy F-35CS penetrated deep inland without ever flickering on a screen. They dropped 24 Stormbreaker bombs squarely onto the Aerospace Force headquarters right in the heart of Tehran. And because the United States military appreciates a very specific sense of humor, they used multi-million-dollar precision bombs to completely level that miserable 30-meter piece of canvas on Belizer Street. The message was loud and clear. Never paint a target you cannot protect. Exactly 29 minutes after the first Iranian missile left its rail, the guns fell silent over the water at 4:16 in the afternoon. But this was not peace. It was the heavy silence of a massive military graveyard stretching all the way to Tehran. The numbers do not lie, and they tell a story of absolute humiliation. On the Iranian side, they watched 62 missiles get intercepted, 15 critical military bases erased, 12 warships sent to rest permanently on the seabed, and over 3,400 personnel pay the ultimate price for the arrogance of their bosses. On the American side, there was not a single scratch on a hull, not a single downed aircraft, and not one sailor in need of a bandage. It was a brutal reality check between 22nd century technology and dusty dreams from the 1970s. While American Marine reconnaissance teams casually landed on Abu Musa Island to seize the victory flags Iran had prepared ahead of time, they found only rubble. Those flags became shameful trophies inside an American display room. The prophecy Tehran painted on their wall finally came true, just in the most bitter way imaginable. They sewed hollow threats on a piece of canvas, and they reaped a merciless hurricane of steel and fire. The carrier strike group did not just survive, it sailed defiantly closer to the coast, proving an eternal truth about the world. The ocean belongs to the strong, and freedom of navigation is a privilege heavily protected by weapons that simply do not know how to show mercy. Tehran traded their entire national defense capability, resetting their military progress by 30 years, all for 29 minutes of pure hell. They learned the ultimate, unforgiving truth of modern warfare that afternoon. You can paint whatever fantasy you want on a piece of street canvas, but when you force a sleeping giant to wake up, it will not just break your sword, it will burn your entire empire to the absolute ground.